You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Welcome into another 3-Law. I am John Kurtz, joined by Derek Young of K-State Online, Cole Manbeck, former beat writer for the Manhattan Mercury. Taking a little pause from hoops to talk football because, hey, the biggest W that K-State's had in a while is keeping Colin Klein around after what turned into a fairly public flirtation there with Notre Dame, getting offered the job to go be the Fighting Irish's offensive coordinator. Colin Klein opts to stay in Manhattan. I'm sure a monster raise is coming for him, but man, how about that? Today's day and age of college football with the money disparity between the haves and the have-nots, K-State keeps around Colin Klein. Huge deal, and certainly something worthy of raising a glass of 360 vodka or Ben Holiday Bottle and Bond Bourbon 2. Someone get some of that to Colin, by the way. Let's make sure that we show him the love because he showed K-State a lot of love by sticking around. And you love bourbon, you'll love the Ben Holiday Bottle and Bond Bourbon. If vodka is more your style, make sure to get the 360 vodka. Ben Holiday Bottle and Bond Bourbon, 360 vodka, brought to you by Holiday Distillery. We're great supporters of the pod and K-State folks. So Colin is staying. I had the thought, guys, of, in fact, I meant to tweet this at one point. I'm surprised I was off my game that I didn't actually put it out there. Remember when Roy Williams, the first time around, was thinking about going or staying? I felt like, with K-State Twitter at that point, it was kind of like the digital gathering of folks at Memorial Stadium because Kansas literally had people piled into Memorial Stadium. Now the greatest multi-use facility in the state of Kansas being funded by taxpayers. They had all these people in there crammed in just to watch Roy Williams at a press conference, and he dropped those two words, "I'm staying," and the whole football stadium goes crazy, which I'm sure was the biggest cheer of the year in 1998 or whenever the hell that actually was. Felt like it was kind of the same way with Colin and Notre Dame, except just the 2023 version of that. Everybody on Twitter just like, oh boy. And then we got the news. Heather Dinich is the one that first dropped it out there on Twitter, even though DY was on top of it earlier than that. But this is a pretty big deal, DY, to get Colin to stick around.
Yeah, and I think he wrestled with it more than at least I would have anticipated it. And then probably a large portion of Kansas State fans. I thought he was pretty much embedded and rooted in Manhattan with the whole family being here, really starting a family and having kids. I just thought that he would just, be totally content with, and not that he isn't, but just be totally content and not really entertain any other overtures or opportunities elsewhere, even if it were a Notre Dame, so to speak. But he definitely saw this as a potential solid move for him, at least professionally speaking, because he explored it. He definitely dove headfirst into it. He made a trip to South Bend. He was around that program for a day or two. He spoke with Marcus Freeman, I think, on multiple occasions. So I think this was something that he explored and entertained. And I think there might have even been a moment where he himself probably thought, or at least gave it some thought about being the offensive coordinator in Notre Dame and kind of putting himself in those shoes and seeing how it felt. I think it was that far along, or I think it was that close. But at the end of the day, what did win out was what I thought would probably win out a little bit earlier, and that was what Manhattan means to him, what Kansas State means to him, his love for community and alma mater. There isn't a person as connected to a community or school, not more, but maybe as much than Colin Klein in Kansas State. And I know you guys can speak to that more, just how embedded he is, what he means to the community and what it means to him. Because he's pretty much, he has a wife and he has kids, but he's as married to Kansas State as he is them, it feels like. I just can't think of another person in another school as closely tied as what Klein is to Kansas State at this point.
Well, I mean, you got Shaylin Spaney, now Shaylin Klein, who's a K-State legacy with Gary Spaney, her father, his father-in-law. I mean, it's a K-State family, right? And he's now been here since 2007, 2008, whenever Ron Prince recruited him. And he's been through the lows and he's been through the highs. And, he's only left, I think he left 1 year for Northern Iowa to be the offensive coordinator and then came back. So, yeah, that's a pure Kansas State family, and ultimately the emotions of leaving Kansas State, it sounds like, are what kept him here in Manhattan. And look, when these rumors started to circulate it all happened so fast. I mean, it came out of nowhere last Wednesday or Thursday. I scoffed at it initially because I'm like, Colin Klein isn't leaving K-State. Like, even if he did talk to Notre Dame, like, he's going to get a raise here, and I just don't see him leaving for the money to go to Notre Dame. And then things really seemed to get a lot more serious just over a 12-hour period. And then DY, you'd mentioned to us in a separate group text that it certainly seemed to have some legs. And I think we were about to go to bed I think it was Thursday night, thinking that Colin Klein was in all likelihood going to leave K-State. And then, John, you and I got a text from Derek. This is the premium group text we're in, where we get the inside info, where DY, maybe you can take us through this, that he met with some of the players and maybe the emotion, and maybe Taylor Bratt too. I think you mentioned just, we're able to convince Colin and get to him that he didn't want to leave. So maybe you could take us through kind of how that whole thing unfolded, because then the next morning we immediately, like at 7 a.m., found out that he was staying.
By the way,
Yeah.
if you have to ask about the DY premium group text, you can't afford it.
Hey, I would say I don't know that it was. I think at first I was under the impression that it was like meeting, but I think it was more communication through phones. And I don't think that he was, when he got back from South Bend, I think that was that Thursday evening. I get my days mixed up as well. I don't know that he was openly communicating with everyone. I think he wanted to kind of take it all in and kind of, explore the pros and cons of doing such a thing. And I think Kansas State kind of caught wind that this was certainly a potential post that he could take. And I think once that happened, they unleashed an effort where I think he was spoken to or messaged by several players and coaches and just everyone that he knew that kind of understood that he was certainly considering going to South Bend. And I think there was a few meaningful messages, one being from quarterback Will Howard as well. Those two are very, very tight. You think back to, how tight Skylar Thompson was to Colin Klein and Chris Kleiman. I think that's certainly a relationship that's blossoming, and to the same degree, between Klein and Will Howard. And I think, just from people I've spoken to, I think, those messages from Will Howard really resonated. And I think when Colin Klein went to bed that night and woke up the next morning, I think those connections that he has formed with those players that he coaches, and that's one of the reasons why they ultimately have a lot of success too, and just won a Big 12 and he doesn't have guys exiting his room on a yearly basis, knock on wood, at least yet, right? You see it everywhere. You haven't really seen it at Kansas State. You got guys transferring in and still nobody transferring out. It's a little bit different. He's recruited well. He's got Avery Johnson. You got Adrian Martinez. You got Skylar Thompson. He knows how to recruit. He builds relationships really well, and they're meaningful. They're genuine. That's how he lives his life. And the way he lives his life is the way he coaches and the way he recruits, and guys feed off of that. And because of that, they don't want him to leave. And I think you get some heartfelt, powerful conversations with some of the players that you have built those relationships with. And ultimately, that's what keeps you in Manhattan. That's what keeps you at Kansas State. So it's kind of funny how that comes back around. What makes him a great coach is why the players love him, and that's what keeps him at Kansas State. It's kind of the circle of the world there to coming around. And I just thought of this too. Bill Snyder, he means everything to Kansas State. He turned the program around, biggest turnaround in sports. He is Kansas State football. He's got someone coming for him a little bit. I don't think Colin Klein will ever reach Bill Snyder, but Bill Snyder was responsible for 2 Big 12 championships at Kansas State when Kansas State was nothing in football when he took over. And now Colin Klein just was a part of his second Big 12 championship as well. I don't know. Maybe Taylor Bratt, I think, was around for both maybe. I don't know. No, he wasn't. That was 2003 or 2012. I don't know if he was, but Colin Klein's a part of 2 Big 12 championships. And then Bill Snyder might be the only one that can say that.
I think Taylor was there in 2012. I believe he was. But your point is still very, very much valid in what you're making there. And like that's a part of what I wanted to come on the pod today to emphasize. It's like, people, you need to really genuinely appreciate that. And I know it seemed like the instant reaction was a lot of that, but like, really genuinely appreciate that, because we're in a day and age where coaches jumping is more common, certainly jumping for more money and prestige. I mean, you look at like, to me, this felt similar to Oklahoma State from 2021. They almost make the college football playoff. They win the Fiesta Bowl, barely miss winning the Big 12 championship. They have this phenomenal year, and then Jim Knowles gets poached to go to DY's Ohio State Buckeyes. They lose their defensive coordinator. He goes, and I don't think Jim Knowles was seen as like, a job jumping sort of guy or whatever, but he went because typically you're going to go to that sort of blue blood type job. And the other thing that needs to be pointed out is like financially here, people think about this kind of offer being on the table. I mean, Colin Klein made $600K last year at K-State. Tommy Rees, who just left Notre Dame to go to Alabama, was making $2 million a year. $2 million as the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. So that they had some money to pay. So Colin turned down a lot of money and a job that is, I mean, quite literally, perhaps, the greatest all-time in college football history, when at one point in time, K-State was the worst place to be a football coach in college football history. So I just very much appreciate that this happened. It is not only a testament to Colin, but a sign of the program that Chris Klieman has built. I mean, this is another like outward sign of just how strong the culture is within that program and how crazy the turnaround with that has been over the last couple of years, to have things this strong and this in place when somebody big comes calling like that, to be able to keep your guy still around here. We'll see how long it lasts, and what, is Colin maybe going to start getting head coaching opportunities here at some point? Probably something that's worthy of discussion, but for now, and live in the moment and be incredibly, incredibly gracious and grateful to Colin Klein for sticking around.
John, are you sure that poverty-ass program Notre Dame could have afforded Colin? I mean, they couldn't pay Andy Ludwig's buyout, from Utah.
That's the other thing that's just been wild about this. So yeah, the other guy that they were really zeroing in on was Utah offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig, who of course moonlighted as K-State's offensive coordinator for 2 months back in 2009 when Bill Snyder first got hired back before he then went on to Cal. So I was like, what is happening? Like, why am I hearing about Colin Klein and Andy Ludwig? And like, it was like going in a time machine back to 2009. But yeah, they couldn't pay his $2.3 million buyout, it sounds like, to get him to Notre Dame. So they're having trouble.
Yeah, well, I just joke because I immediately that night got a DM from a random Notre Dame fan. I think he sent it to multiple K-State people that calling K-State a poverty-ass program, losing Klein to Notre Dame. I digress. It would have been a huge blow to this program. You just got the offense really going, number one in the Big 12 in points per drive this last season. You have a lot of returning guys on offense. You just signed one of your better skill position classes. You got Trayshawn Ward coming in at running back, but you've got a great receiver class coming in from the high school ranks, and then Keegan Johnson. And it's late in the process. So like, to have this happen in mid-February would have been really tough to swallow, I'm sure, for a lot of those guys that enrolled at Kansas State already, that transferred in on the offensive side of the football, that signed and are already here for spring football from the high school ranks as well. Like, you start losing Thad Ward, and then you lose Colin Klein, and it feels like a bit of an upheaval. And Chris Klieman would have had to find somebody in just 1 year that had fixed the offense and really gotten it rolling, find somebody to replace him that would have fit in that locker room and with the play calling and the system. And so it's absolutely huge for the momentum going into this season that they were to keep him. Like you said, John, like, gauging all the reports of how many teams were interested in Colin, Alabama and Texas A&M, and how they had interest in him as well. He's going to get a lot of interest, especially if they have another good year this year offensively. Like, he'll probably get head coaching jobs somewhere. But I think the one encouraging thing is down the road, when the time comes, if Colin is successful, whether it be at other places too as an OC or as a head coach, I think you can feel pretty confident that if K-State made the choice to pursue Colin Klein when Chris Klieman steps away, or whenever that time is, and wanted him to be the head coach at K-State, I think you can feel pretty confident that Colin would take that job, and you would finally have that K-State legacy guy that would actually be willing to come home, unlike Brad Underwood, unlike Brent Venables. Colin's different.
I think he certainly is. I'm not laughing because that's wrong. It's right. Colin Klein is to Kansas State, and Kansas State means to him, I think, what many had hoped or believed would be the case for someone like Brent Venables, so to speak. So I think that's totally true. If you were to put odds on who's the next head coach at Kansas State after Chris Klieman, I would imagine that it's a runaway favorite at this point, that it's Colin Klein. A lot can happen between now and then, don't get me wrong, but it would seem like it would have to be a big departure from where we are now for Colin Klein not to succeed Chris Klieman as the next head coach at Kansas State, in my opinion. Another point I wanted to make before we probably touch on a few other football items is that it is interesting. I know we already poked fun a little bit at Notre Dame, because now not only did they come up empty on their pursuit of Colin Klein, they came up empty on their pursuit of Andy Ludwig. That was more financially driven. So it's interesting because it is Notre Dame. But Kansas State was able to keep said alum at home as offensive coordinator Colin Klein. Remember, Notre Dame's replacing Tommy Rees. That was the same situation, but he bolted. Now, Alabama is on a different mountain than Notre Dame, but, I mean, it's still Alabama. It's still Notre Dame. Kansas State was able to do what Notre Dame was not.
Well, it sounds like from the your reporting, and like Kellis, I know, reported it as well, that yes, Texas A&M, Alabama, other schools are interested in him. If it were Alabama that the offer came from, would we still be doing this same pod about Colin spurning somebody to come back?
Man, I don't know. I'd like to think yes, because I think ultimately there's a part of me that thinks he'd almost kind of made that decision. He was going to Notre Dame until he was met with those emotional, powerful conversations with some of his players. So I imagine that would have still happened if it was Bama too. Now, is that one too powerful to overcome the other powerful message? I don't know. I would like to think so, but I don't want to. That Alabama is different, but the money's probably similar. And I wouldn't want to speak for Colin Klein in that situation, but I imagine the emotional powerfulness of the conversations with his players would still take place and still make that a tough conversation.
Yeah, I agree, DY. I think ultimately any job, I think he probably, when push came to shove, would have just stayed at K-State. Now, there's something to be said about being able to attach your resume to coaching with Nick Saban, right? Because that's a huge pull when you get hired elsewhere, but I don't think Colin's going to have that problem down the road, and knowing that K-State in all likelihood would love for him to be the head coach if he continues to be successful in the future. Like, if I'm Notre Dame, I probably have to turn to KU's offensive coordinator now, in the search. That's probably what I would do. So maybe point Marcus Freeman in that direction to Lawrence. I think, what's it, Colton Nicky? I can't say it.
Total Nicky.
Yeah.
He's lit, as far as I'm concerned. That's the brains of the operation. That's the most impressive thing to me about what's going on in Lawrence. So I totally agree. I think in a similar kind of position to where Colin Klein is at right now, probably a guy who's going to sit and wait for lower tier head coaching jobs. That was going to be kind of my closing thought here on this, is like, if we're thinking about the long-term health of K-State, wouldn't it be a good thing if in the next couple of years Colin takes like a G5 head coaching job, if something like that were to come around, cut his teeth there a little bit?
Maybe, but I don't know. He knows Kansas State so well, and if he's working next to Chris Klieman for, a handful, several years, whatever it may be, I guess I'm because he knows Kansas State so well, and he's a play caller right now, and he's going to be working for a head coach that I consider to be very, very good at what he does, especially from a head coaching perspective. I don't know that really having that head coaching experience beforehand is really a prerequisite or something that he must have or something that he needs to have in order to find success. I think just being a play caller, an offensive coordinator, or in a school but better than anyone would be enough for me anyway to have confidence.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a risk when you take, it depends on the job you take. A lot of those group of 5 jobs, those lower tier jobs are bad jobs, and they can expose you in a bad way when it's not necessarily fair. Like you take a bad job and you can't get it going, and then people start to wonder, well, is he a good head coach, right? I would rather be at a school, a Power 5 school, where I have a great offense and working with a great head coach. I'm not saying Colin Klein would fail as a head coach at a group of 5 school. I think he'd be successful, but it'd have to be the right job. It also could be a pay cut. I think Collin's going to get a substantial raise here in the near future before this next season. Now, it might not be as high as we thought, but I think it'll be close to $1 million. Not raised, but that's where his salary will probably be. So we'll see when that comes out. But I'm sure there's some leverage being negotiated there by his agent, Clint Dowdle, which was another interesting piece to all that Notre Dame stuff, John, as we remember Clint Dowdle from being on John Curry's staff at K-State. So I had forgotten that he left for the agent world.
Well, the other thing that you should be very appreciative about Colin is that, yes, if indeed that is correct, Colin comes out and he's not even making a full $1 million a year as a coordinator. To me, that feels like, Tom Brady leaving a little bit of money off the table so that the Patriots could have a little more wiggle room in free agency, right? Or, Patrick Mahomes not putting his fist down on the table and demanding that he'd be the highest paid guy. Like, it's a considerable, Colin has the leverage to be making a lot more and hold K-State over the barrel for a lot more money than that. So I think that tells you everything you need to know if that winds up being the actual figure.
It also tells me that the whole Notre Dame thing was more about professional development than money.
For sure. That's why if we're talking about like him taking a G5 head coaching job, I doubt that the money thing would really matter to him. I think he's already shown that that's not the motivator for him. And he's way better human than I am for that part of it. But that I think is the reality. Okay. K-State's been looking for a new wide receiver coach. And DY, I'll just leave it up to you to say what it is that you want to about Matthew Middleton, who has been at South Florida for like a month, 2 months. Before that was at Kent State, is a Kansas City guy, and has, I'm not going to say been, Football Scoop was the first to put out like a public report about this, but I know you've been on top of it, DY, so I'll just let you say whatever it is that you want to say about Matthew Middleton.
They were the first to say that it's going to be him. I didn't know that it was going to be him yet before they did. So they had the scoop. Football Scoop had the scoop on that. It hasn't been announced by the school yet. If you ask me, I'm sure what we're waiting on here is probably just a background check. I think we've all kind of been around these long enough to know that that's typically the last shoe to drop before press release is named, and both of you are in the business of press releases, so correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I would imagine we hear something at some point this week. We're sitting here on Wednesday. I bet he would be announced this week. Matthew Middleton, assuming the report is correct. I think it is. It sounded like his interview went very, very well. It sounded like he knocked it out of the park. They interviewed other guys too. I think Joel Filani was another interview, former Texas Tech assistant that I think was also in North Texas. Was at Washington State last year. Don't know if he's currently employed anywhere at the moment, which is an interesting detail, certainly. But I would imagine Matthew Middleton's the guy. Football Scoop says it is. I think it was definitely trending that way from what I had heard. And I like it when I was told those are kind of the two guys. Just kind of put them square side by side. You guys know this. Even before we knew that he was going to be the guy, I kind of favored Middleton. Talking about the group premium group chat that we're in, I favored Middleton. Yes, maybe he wasn't a Power 5 coach before like Filani had been in the past, but he had been at Kent State and developed Dante Cephas, who was probably arguably the top transfer wide receiver in the market this past year, and transferred to Penn State. He's going to play in the NFL. When you're coaching at Kent State, you're not recruiting studs. You're not recruiting 4 and 5-star guys. You're going to get someone and you turn him into that player. So we know what his coaching is. You know how his development is just from that example. And I think he's probably, what it sounds like, has a couple other guys that he really turned into really good football players at Kent State as well. Cole can probably dig into that more because he's an action lover. And at the end of the day, I think from a head coach, if you look at who has hired him as well, I think that might be the biggest endorsement of all. I mean, when he was at Kent State, the head coach was Sean Lewis, who's now the offensive coordinator for Deion Sanders. Sean Lewis is known as one of the brighter offensive minds in college football today. One of the coaches he hired was Matthew Middleton. Matthew Middleton was just hired by USF a little over a month ago. Their new head coach is Alex Kalesh. He was Josh Heupel's offensive coordinator at Tennessee this past season. He made that offense a lot better as the offensive coordinator. Everyone remembers what Tennessee looked like when Hendon Hooker was the quarterback. It continued with Joe Milton was there as well. Alex Kalesh made that offense really go when Knoxville was the offense coordinator. He went to USF, one of the first guys he wanted to hire was Matthew Middleton. I don't think he can get more endorsements, at least from an offensive standpoint. We're coming from really good coaches there, and Sean Lewis and Alex Kalesh than for Matthew Middleton. So just seeing those types of guys want to hire him makes me excited for, well, at least what his potential or his upside and what his coaching acumen is. And I think he's going to be the next guy at Kansas State for the receivers.
Yeah, DY, I thought you made a really good point on the Sean Lewis front. You know, that's a really good coaching tree that Middleton is coming from. Sean Lewis, as you mentioned, joined Deion Sanders' staff, but was also one of the Railroad candidates, top 3 according to Football Scoop for the Notre Dame offensive coordinator job as well. So he's a pretty coveted offensive mind. And look, I watch a lot of action. You guys know that. And Kent State's offense has always been very dynamic the last several years, and Cephas was a heck of a player. I was trying to find the numbers real quick on where their passing ranks were and receiving ranks, but last year they weren't great, but they've been a good offensive program for a while now. So I think it's a good hire. I think it's a fit. And one of the things you mentioned, DY, that I really like about how Chris Klieman approaches this, and again, I'm not privy to how other teams handled coaching searches, but you mentioned that the players really liked Middleton and the text to us, and that I thought that's unique that Chris Klieman allows a coach that's on an interview in town to meet with the players and get their feedback as well, which I think is important to the culture, and to get their feedback shows more player empowerment, which I think is important, especially in this day and age, and to allow your players to provide that feedback and perspective of what they think. And sounds like he was really well liked by the players. So I don't know if you want to speak to that as well, but I just really appreciate that Chris Klieman and this coaching staff takes that route when they handle these things.
Yeah, that's certainly something they've done in the past. So I don't know if that's common elsewhere, but I don't think this is the first time they've done it. I think it was probably the case when Thad Ward was hired too, I want to say. Because I know it's not the first time I've heard it at K-State. I don't know if it happens everywhere. I do know Middleton did. He was a candidate last year when they hired Thad Ward too. So this is not a new name to them as well.
Okay. Interesting. A lot of good nuggets there. A lot of good nuggets from DY. This is why you guys need to get your paper up, as the kids would say, so you can get in that DY premium group chat. I don't know. What do you think you could charge for that thing, DY?
I don't know. You know what? I don't know. But between now and football season, it's $30 at KSO. So do that.
Nice.
There you go.
Best thing. Make sure that you go get your KSO memberships on there. And hey, speaking of money, Cole, I came up with this idea to kind of close on here. We're talking about K-State hiring a really nice wide receivers coach, obviously keeping around a coordinator when big money was being thrown around by Notre Dame. The next time that somebody comes sniffing around the Clandy man or Colin or whoever, what K-State needs to do to ensure that they will never be outbid by somebody is create an office space, a multi-use office space for the coaches' offices, and just call it the Gateway Coaches Center instead of the Gateway, well, maybe even Gateway Conference Center, Gateway Coaches Conference Center, make it a multi-use facility, and get the Department of Commerce to take $50 million and give it to K-State for that. And then bam, you've got your slush fund for assistant salaries, and you'll never get outbid for a coach again. I think that's the move here, right?
Yeah. I knew where you were going with that before you even got halfway through. And I mean, if they built like a statue of like Chris Klieman or Colin Klein, could that count too toward the project? You know, get some taxpayer money for that?
Well, listen, I read through someone sent me a link to the proposal that was out there. You can go read it online if you'd like, from Kansas Athletics about this. And I learned that, athletics are the front door to a university. And I learned that, it's important to be in a Power 5 league. And in order to be in a Power 5 league and then create commerce for the state, this is a big deal. And it's a thing that we need to do. So, to get K-State fans spending more money, I think it brings a lot of commerce to the state when Colin Klein's out there calling the good plays and K-State scoring TDs, man. I mean, that's bringing a lot of money into the state. So to me, that seems like it still fits under the Department of Commerce.
Well, one thing on that, and this is, I got to apologize to Jordan, our producer. Shout out to Jordan, who's just amazing. And he has to sit here and listen to our bullshit talking about this. And Jordan's a kid.
What have we said? I mean, We're making the same argument.
No, we're not. Yeah, no. I apologize to Jordan that he's going to have to listen to this because Jordan's a great guy, and but he's also KU. Yeah, I thought KU was supposed to have a lot of money. I thought KU alums were supposed to be able to raise all this money, and yet they're having to borrow $85 million in government money to fund a stadium, while K-State over the last 11 years has spent over $300 million of privately raised donations from our wealthy, rich fan base and alumni base to build facilities all over for athletics. And yet here's KU having to borrow money essentially from taxpayer dollars.
Where's Cliff Illig? Where's is it R.C. Buford? I don't know that dude's name. I don't know. You know, the guys that are all fueling Vernon's Substack. Where are all they at right now?
The Vernon Substack. I don't like. I don't agree with how that's being utilized, but that's a different stand. Like, that money should not be going there, but KU has found a loophole. So like you said on Twitter yesterday, John, K-State needs to try and figure out if they can find a loophole. Now, there's not a lot more facilities for K-State to add because, you know, we've already built the Taj Mahal of facilities in Manhattan for the last several years, but Bramlage could use some work.
I need to call one thing out here, okay? Because I was about to make the way too low-hanging fruit joke of like, well, you know, I mean, someone had to, you know, these bathrooms aren't going to pay for themselves. But Bramlage, the biggest issue is we got 2 bathrooms for the entire like lower level, and now they're selling more premium seating there. So your problem has gone from just media complaining about having to waste all of halftime to stand in the bathroom line to now patrons complaining about having to stand. So some Bramlage renovations, you know, I mean, that's how you package it together. Put a conference center in Bramlage that, Lord willing, has more than 2 single stall bathrooms for the entire lower level. That would be my suggestion.
I mean, that's definitely needed, as all of us can speak to after being cut in the line by, you know, announcers, ESPN folks for numerous years at halftime.
Yeah, that PA guy, Mitch Fordner, coming in.
Yeah, Mitch, big time. He's going to cut you in line because he's got to get back out there to, you know, do the PA. So that is needed. Unfortunately, you just took the steam out of the joke because I was going to ask how much a toilet costs these days, and, you know, for KU, but... Now you do mention that we've got a little bit of an issue in that tunnel in Bramlage that does need to be resolved. You know, we'll see. K-State can come up with something too to get some money there.
Track and field, baseball, soccer, volleyball, the indoor football facility, Jerome Tang, Chris Kleiman. I think Gene Taylor probably deserves his due at some point, probably not getting enough due, if we're being honest.
I mean, I told Gene Taylor on the pod a while back that he could call me a dumbass, you know, for ever criticizing him. I mean, so... I'm just saying, I'm not saying he's done a perfect job, and I'm not even calling you out either. I'm not saying a perfect job. But from what fans used to say about him, or what some fans still think about him, kind of just being this bland guy, he's certainly got a hell of a lot done in the last 4 or 5 years.
He has. Hey, yeah, that is one thing I will not be pouty or negative about at all, man. I love me some Mean Gene. Kudos to the big man up top. Okay. Anything else? Are we done with football? No more football news and notes. No more shots to get in the rest of the way. Okay. Speak now or hold your peace. That's it. It's going to do it for us here on Threemont, rousing into the podcast. Make sure and chug your 360 vodka, your Ben Holiday bottle of Bond bourbon. Maybe don't chug, drink responsibly. But support Holiday Distillery. We appreciate their support. Great K-State folks. Go out there and support them. Thank you to Jordan Foote behind the scenes. Appreciate DY and Cole as always. I'm John Kurtz. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts, bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.